privilege and pleasure to move this motion on a very serious issue of consular support for British citizens. And I would like, if the Chair will allow me, to share experience of someone whose loved one has died abroad. So you've gone to Paris for the weekend. It's your husband's birthday and you're going to celebrate. You get to Paris and you're having a lovely time. Your son and daughter and their partners are with you. Between the restaurant and the hotel, your husband is attacked at random. He didn't see it coming. None of you did. And he was so brutally beaten that he was taken to hospital and put on a life support machine. Your son and son-in-law were also attacked and taken to hospital. You arrived at the hospital to find you could not understand the language, and you were asked to sign a document, but it wasn't in English. You couldn't read it and you were panicking as it related to your husband's care. You're in shock. It's night time. It's dark. What do? You decide to call the British Embassy. They'll know what to do. But it's closed because it's Saturday night and it's not open again until Monday. Monday comes and your husband's life support machine has been turned off. You didn't get a choice in the matter. The rules are different in France to the UK. You are devastated. Your husband, whose birthday you were coming to celebrate, has been murdered. You managed to contact the embassy on Monday and they tell you they're sorry to hear what's happened, but they can't help you and you'll need to find a lawyer. They agree to send you a list though, and you get a piece of paper with some names in French and phone numbers. You ring the first one, you try to explain your husband has been murdered, and the lawyer on the end of the phone tells you he's too busy to take the case. Your daughter calls the next one, and they ask for €1,000 up front and all the documents in the case. You go to the hospital where you're handed a report, but you can't read it because it's in French. You call the embassy who say they don't deal with translation. You'll need to organise that yourself. You go to the police station where no one can tell you what will happen next and whether the criminals who attacked your family will be traced. You tell them what happened and are asked to sign a document that you can't read. You ask for a translation and they can't help you. You need to get back home because you can't afford to stay. You don't want to leave your husband and your son because he's still in intensive care. Someone present at the embassy agrees to drive you to the airport. They tell you that's not part of their job description and they're doing it as a favour because they feel sorry for you. But please don't mention it to anyone. You get back to London, queuing for the flight check-in. You have 2 suitcases, yours and your husband's. When you get to the desk, you're told there'll be a charge because you have extra luggage. On the flight, someone from the airline announces a welcome on board and says, "We hope you enjoyed your trip." You get home, you call the Foreign Office, someone asks you to explain what's happened, you give them the details and you have to relive it all. They say that they aren't the person who can help, but someone will ring you back tomorrow. The next day, no one phones. You call back and get someone else who asks you to go through the story again. They ask if you had insurance and whether you plan to get the body home or not, and if you don't have insurance, you'll have to find the money for repatriation yourself, but you'll need to speak to a funeral director about that. But what they do is send you a bereavement pack. What's your email address? You call the funeral director to go through organising repatriation after you've called your insurance company. And imagine, if you will, for just a second, that you don't have insurance and instead you just have to set up a crowdfunding page asking any generous members of the public for enough money to get your partner back so you could have a funeral. You were due back to work on Monday. You don't know what your name is or what day of the week it is, let alone go back to work. So you arrange to see your GP who signs you off sick. You can't work and your husband was the main source of income in your household. The French lawyer is asking lots of questions and then spending a lot of time on your case. And you want justice, so there's legal fees, travel and a lot of stress and trauma ahead. You feel so alone. This can't be right. You're at home now and you're watching the news of a young girl who's fallen from a balcony in suspicious circumstances overseas. The comment from the news presenter says, "We asked the Foreign Office for comment, who said we are assisting the family at this difficult time." You wonder what assistance they're getting that you're not. You decide to set up your own charity to ensure families are supported in the future. It's too late for yours, but God forbid some other poor family has to suffer this alone. Let's make sure this doesn't happen again. Murdered Abroad was set up in 2001 by Eve Henderson. Deaths Abroad You're Not Alone in 2013 by Julie Love, whose son Colin tragically drowned in water that was deemed safe off the coast of a Venezuelan island. The Kirsty Maxwell charity was set up by my constituents, Brian and Denise Curry, Kirsty's parents, who want to help others who suffer such a traumatic loss of a loved one abroad. And the Lucy Blackman Trust, formed after the brutal attack of Lucy Blackman in Japan in 2000. The Jessica Lawson Retreat was set up by her family as a retreat for those bereaved after Jessica tragically drowned on a school trip in France in 2015, and they also continue to campaign on water safety issues. The British Rights Abroad group was set up by the families of Nazanin Zacharie Radcliffe and Matthew Hedges to campaign and represent families of those held illegally abroad. These are services, Madam Deputy Speaker, set up by families devastated by the loss or incarceration of a loved one, now plugging the gaps of government. They do incredible work, and I pay tribute to them, and they will always be a place for charities and organisations like theirs, but they should not have to be picking up the pieces of a government's failings. The experience I just shared with you, I'll be very happy to give way to London.
I thank the member for giving way, and I'm actually sorry to interrupt a very powerful speech that she's making, and thank her for getting this debate. She knows the case of my constituent, Nazanin Zacharie Radcliffe, very well, having spoken in several debates in support of her release. She may be aware that Nazanin Zacharie Radcliffe was granted diplomatic protection by this government in 2019, but 3 years on, almost nothing has been done to use the diplomatic protection that was bestowed upon her to bring her home. The government has been unwilling to assert its right to consular access to Nazanin, challenge Iran's unlawful behaviour at the International Court of Justice, or use their right under the Vienna Convention to request private consular meetings with the Iranian regime. So does my honourable member friend agree that the government risks undermining UK's diplomatic protection by failing to utilise it in my constituent's case?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I pay tribute to the work that she has done on behalf of Nazanin, Richard and their family. And I wholeheartedly agree, and I will come on to some of those points in my speech. And the experience I just shared with the Chamber is just one of the many devastating accounts that I've heard since I started working on this issue. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to take a moment, if I may, to thank the Backbench Business Committee and all who are speaking today and who have supported this work. I want to give thanks to Eve Henderson of Murdered Abroad, of Julie Love of Deaths Abroad, You're Not Alone, of Redress, Miles Manning, Stuart's Law, the British Rights Abroad Group, and all who have contributed to today's preparation and who in their own ways advocate for different parts of the broader issue we are debating. I would also like to thank, if the House will indulge me for just a moment, my own constituency team who have worked tirelessly on this issue. When we set up the all-party group, we didn't deploy an organisation to support us because we felt the issue was too sensitive. So my own team have taken evidence and worked on this issue. Marcus Woods, Sabrina Rossetti, Chloe McClellan, Adam Robinson, and specifically Stephanie McTighe, my Chief of Staff, and Michelle Roger, my former comms manager. Michelle passed away from cancer in August this year, and she believed passionately in this work and in this issue. She is much missed by all in my team. Madam Deputy Speaker, when we founded the all-party group on Deaths Abroad and Consular Services and took evidence from over 60 families and 30 organisations, Michelle was very much at the heart of this work. Forgive me. She sat in on every session, diligently recording and taking note of the devastating experiences and making sure that they were properly reflected in the report that we wrote and published at the end of 2019. And why did we do that? Because, like all of you across this House, I have constituents who have been left devastated by the murder, suspicious death, incarceration or loss of a family member abroad. And in their time of most desperate need, they faced a lack of support from the Foreign Office. Julie Pearson was killed in Eilat, Israel in 2015, and Kirsty Maxwell was killed in Benidorm, Spain in 2016. They were two devastating constituency cases of young women taken in their prime in the most distressing and violent ways imaginable, and their families were left without the support they needed. Them coming forward to me to get support highlighted the issue to me. So I come to this debate and indeed these issues in genuinely the spirit of cooperation, as a critical friend. I genuinely want to work with government to make these things, the system better for families, for consular staff, for civil servants and for all whose lives are touched by this issue. And it is those families who are really at the heart of the APPG's work, and I want to thank all of them for the time they have spent with my team and I. They have given evidence, they have shared their traumatic experiences, and they live with a huge gap in their lives. Family members of those who are killed overseas without travel insurance to cover repatriation are in many cases left to crowdfund to repatriate the body of their loved one. Every time I see one of these crowdfunders pop up, Madam Deputy Speaker, my heart sinks, because I just know, from having spoken to the families that we have worked with, what they are facing. If your loved one is murdered overseas, it's estimated that it could cost anything up to £60,000. Criminal injuries compensation is only available if the murderer was in the UK, or unless the murder abroad was by means of a terrorist attack. And to be clear, there are only around 300 suspicious deaths abroad every year. Obviously, that number has been significantly different recently because of the pandemic, but of course, as things open up or don't, depending on where we will be, we have to recognise the challenges that are in front of us. And the House and those watching may be interested, and indeed glad to know, that terror attack victims are given an immediate payment of around £3,000, and then, I believe, further payments further down the line. And the repatriation is handled and paid for by the government. And I want to recognise that we have not taken evidence from victims of terror attacks, and I understand that many have raised concerns with the level of support in what we can only imagine are some of the most devastating of circumstances. In the many families we spoke to, we heard of spiralling costs because of need to pay for translation of documents, cost of legal representation, accommodation and travel. And Dame Vera Baird also recognised this in her 2019 report, Struggling for Justice, when she recognised those issues and the need for financial support for victims' families. So I ask the Government, can murder victims overseas please get parity with terrorist victims, and the Criminal Injuries Compensation Scheme amended accordingly? Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, if we can provide those services when someone is killed in a terrorist attack, why can we not offer them to those who are killed in suspicious circumstances abroad? Those services are there. Let's extend them. And can I ask the FCDO and the Ministry of Justice, who fund the Victim Support Homicide Service, please make transparent the assessment about who gets help and what that looks like? Because at the moment, families fall down the gaps of eligibility far too often and are re-traumatised by the process of just seeking help. The FCDO states that in its guidance that there is no legal right to consular assistance. All assistance provided is at our discretion. It does beg the question then, that given these are our citizens, these are our own folk, why would we not offer that service on a mandatory and consistent basis? What are the arguments for not offering it? Because the former Minister for Asia, Mark Field, said consular assistance is central to our work at the FCO. So these two things, that consular assistance is central to the FCDO's work and that it has no obligation to provide it, makes it seem that the Foreign Office is somewhat conflicted within itself about what it offers to its own citizens. So I'll ask the Government, will it enshrine in law a right to consular assistance, and if not, why not? Because our citizens need clarity and they need transparency. After all, the first duty of any government should be to protect its citizens. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, please excuse me. A lot has been made of global Britain and about Britain's greatness. It's not so great, however, when it comes to helping its own citizens. And we have evidence that families and indeed consular staff are left without the right help, resource or support to help them and deal with the death or detainment of their loved ones in their darkest hour. Only this week we've heard of the gross failings of the FCDO during the evacuation of Afghanistan. In 2019, it was reported that in the last 30 years, the number of Foreign Office staff has fallen by more than 1,000. In 2015, the Foreign Affairs Committee said in a report that budget cuts and low pay at the Foreign Office are endangering the UK's global role and could have a disastrous and costly effect on the government's ability to make informed judgments on critical issues, and that the cuts imposed on the FCO since 2010 have been severe and have gone beyond just trimming fat. Capacity and now appears to be being damaged. So fewer people are under greater pressure and doing more of the work with less resources. That is terrifying. And the staff need the help and support so they can do their job properly, Minister. So for those families of loved ones, but also for staff in your own service, the bereavement pack, please make these changes, because the bereavement pack that the Foreign Office provides does not say that if you're killed in suspicious circumstances abroad, you may well fall through a gap. Even the murder manslaughter team at the FCDO won't be able to take your case. It will be left with a general country casework team staffed by junior members of the Foreign Office who may not have the relevant experience or resources to support a family. And for them, dealing with those cases must be incredibly difficult and traumatic. Now, the Foreign Affairs Committee review recommended in 2014 that the Foreign Office need an Access to Justice unit. Madam Deputy Speaker, that Access to Justice unit was renamed and became the Murder-Manslaughter team, purely because it was deemed too difficult to deal with cases of suspicious deaths. So if it's too difficult for a government department deploying thousands of bright minds, where does that leave an individual family who falls through the cracks?
Lost.
So I ask the government, will they revisit this Access to Justice unit or similar dedicated to cases of suspicious deaths overseas? I get how difficult these issues are. I worked for the US Department of State in their Edinburgh consulate, and I saw first-hand how hard it was being a consular officer. But I also saw prisoners being visited regularly and checked on, regardless of their crime, because it was the right thing to do. When a US citizen died, I saw families met at the airport, not as a favour to keep under the radar, because it was the right thing to do. I saw staff coordinating with local police and taking a compassionate and trauma-informed approach. The families we have met and taken evidence from, who I would dearly love to name all of them individually, but I just can't, I don't have time, have touched my team and I forever, and I would invite the ministers to spend some time in their company to understand and hear from them. I would also suggest that in the course of consular staff being trained, they should also do the same. My team had vicarious trauma training following the evidence sessions we held. That was recommended and it was necessary. I fear for the consular staff and the staff retention of the FCDO, particularly in the murder-manslaughter team, who are doing the very, very best they can in some of the most difficult circumstances. Who is looking after them and who is training them, and does it work for families? Only recently I heard of a family not being called back. There is clearly a staffing issue, an issue with levels of service. We have experienced and trained police, senior investigating officers and homicide teams, yet they are not being connected with families needing the benefit of their knowledge. We have lawyers and police officers offering their time pro bono to help these cases. The help is here in the UK and it is possible, but we are not doing more to join these people up. That costs nothing but makes a huge difference. So can I ask the government, will it work with the all-party group to explore working with professionals in this area across these islands to join them up with those who need the benefit of their knowledge? Lawyers' lists need quality control and people need more support. And for those imprisoned abroad and held illegally, many of these issues are similar and deeply distressing. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, finally, I would like to touch briefly on those who are imprisoned and detained illegally abroad. And I know many of my colleagues from the Western Bartonshire and Glasgow North have worked on issues and fought hard for their constituents, as has the Honourable Lady who's not in her place now for Hampstead. And this is why a legal right to consular assistance is so important for them. I know others will touch on this, but I want to pay tribute to the founding members of the British Rights Abroad group, who have experienced their loved ones being held abroad. Richard Radcliffe and Daniela Tajida have fought valiantly for their loved ones. Nazanin is still, as we have heard, being held in Iran, away from her daughter and family. And although Daniela's husband, Matthew Hedges, is now home from being held in the UAE, his experience of illegal incarceration was horrific. I have spent time with Daniela. I have heard what Matthew went through when he was held in a windowless room, when he was force-fed drugs that have left long-term mental and physical damage. And Daniela was left to fight for Matthew alone with very little support from the UK government. She was advised not to go to the press, but then left completely isolated. That was a completely unacceptable situation, and if she had had the right consular support, I genuinely believe she and Matthew would not have been as damaged and as traumatised as they have been. There are more than 2,000 British prisoners abroad. More than half of them are currently being held without a trial. Like Jagtar Singh Johal, the constituent of my honourable friend, who's been held prisoner in India for nearly 4 years on unfounded terrorism charges, or Billy Irving, who spent 4 years in an Indian prison after being wrongly accused of carrying unlicensed arms and ammunition while he countered piracy, with the British government's authorisation and support. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is so much to say and so much to do on this issue, and so many lives lost and impacted, and so many still fighting for justice for their loved ones. I want to give others a chance to speak, but I also want to be very clear. I want to be clear with the government and I want to be clear with the families. I and my team will continue to fight on this issue, and we want to work with you to make this better. We will not give up. We will not give up the fight on this issue for those families and for their staff.
The question